夠法定人數，咁就馬上請官員入嚟喺度呢，就同委員交代翻呢，就吳亮星議員。
Okay, let's start. Mr. Ng Sing, there are some financial institutions in Macau who have been found to be in violation of certain rules. We have been given a reprise from the government. It's a CB1 887 the bracket 1. So before we proceed to the discussion of the relevant resolutions and regulations, maybe the administration can explain what this letter is about first. Welcome. They are all familiar faces. Deputy Secretary from the CITB, Ms. Carol Yun, Ms. Sam Hui, PAS, and Ms. Michelle Fun, Acting Senior Government Counsel. Ms. Yun, on the 22nd of May, you gave us a reply saying that if there are cases in Macau that are violating some international obligations or UN sanctions order and what you will be doing in response, you have given us a letter. Can you please briefly explain what it is to members? After the last meeting, some members asked us to look into the application of UN sanctions in Hong Kong and Macau. And we gave a reply to the subcommittee subsequently. Simply put, in Hong Kong, we implement the sanctions resolutions through a local piece of local legislation in order to give effect to the UN sanctions. The UN requires member states to report to it the way the sanctions are carried out. As Hong Kong is not a member state, so through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs office in Hong Kong, we would report to the UN on the latest situation in relation to the sanctions. And we have also looked into Macau's cases. There was a case involving a bank in Macau. The matter was looked into by the Macau Monetary Authority. According to the Macau Monetary Authority, that case was not related to UN sanctions because there was a case related to the Patriots Act, the U.S. Patriots Act, and a sanction was imposed on that basis. According to the Macau SAR government, like Hong Kong, the Macau SAR government would refer the report to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs office in Macau, and they would also gazette the order, the notice. So they do this through the publication of a notice, and we do it through a piece of local legislation. And after publishing the notice in Macau, the relevant sanctions will take effect in Macau. Mr. Ng Sing, I thank the government for giving us this reply to our follow-up questions. Well, the case was not related to anything international, but to an act of the USA. So that case may not be related to the sanctions that we're going to discuss, which are international in nature. They said that they have a different arrangement to give effect to the sanctions. I understand that different jurisdictions may come up with different arrangements. They would publish a notice.
有咗一個地位就係可能刊登就係已經係等於香港或者喺
So it's the equivalent of the Gazetto procedure in Hong Kong. So if no one responds to the notice, the order will take effect. Since this is about foreign affairs and
係簡單化咧，就當然我哋未必話。
Can we consider doing this through an automatic mechanism? So if no one has got nothing special to say about the notice, then it should take effect. I'm not suggesting we should give up our power. And of course, this council should also be allowed to consider the relevant regulations and orders. Thank you, Mr. Ng, for your suggestion. As Mr. Ng puts it, different jurisdictions may have different arrangements or practices. On the part of the SAR government, in relation to United Nations sanctions, for years our practice has been that we should implement this through local legislation, and that is under the UN sanctions or ordinance. We should enact regulations so that everything is clear and that everyone knows that through this regulation there's a legal basis to enforce the sanctions, and our law enforcement agencies can also carry out their enforcement duties in accordance with the regulation. And also through the regulation, we tell everyone, we tell the public how the sanctions are executed in Hong Kong. So this has been working well. Different jurisdictions may have different arrangements at this stage. We propose that we should stick to the usual practice, and that is on the direction of the MFA office in Hong Kong. We enact the regulation to give effect to the sanctions. All right. Well, these regulations take effect automatically after the notice is published, and also the direction given by the CPG or DOJ would draft a legal notice, and once it's gazetted, it takes effect. What we can do is just to do some proofreading to see if there's anything amiss, or we may wish to inform the business sector that there are certain implications that they should follow up on. Today we have 3 or 4. We have 3 pieces of information covering 4 countries. CB1 690-1415, Liberia first. Thank you, Madam Chair. First, the first regulation is about Liberia. This is about 2015 regulations, and IEUN Sanctions Liberia Regulation 2015 and UN Sanctions Liberia Regulation 2014 Repeal Regulation. Liberia is on the west coast of Africa. It has been plagued by the civil war, and the rebels are supported by armed forces in neighboring countries. So the UN has imposed sanctions on Liberia. Earlier this year, we received a direction by the FAA saying that we should implement the relevant resolution of the UN. In that particular resolution, certain sanctions are imposed on Liberia. So when we draft the UN Liberia Regulation 2015, actually is similar to the 2014 regulation. The purpose is to continue with the arms embargo and certain financial sanctions. As trade with Liberia is not big, the total volume annually is just 86 million Hong Kong dollars. So the UN sanctions on Liberia will not have any significant impact on our trade with Liberia. So if this is agreeable, Madam Chair, I will ask Mr. Hui to take members through the relevant provisions. Before we proceed to cross by cross, do members have any questions? Paragraph 3, preamble. Reference is made to Ebola. It's very concerned about the outbreak of Ebola and the effect on Africa and Liberia. But for this piece of local legislation, there's nothing about Ebola.
主席，我哋係冇，因為我哋主要係講緊係嗰個制裁方面嘅事情。
Yes, this is about sanctions. So perhaps this can also be offered to Mr. Ng. That's notwithstanding the publication of the notice, something may not be found its way into the law, the regulation. Mr. Martin Liu. Well, we don't impose sanctions on the country because of the virus. You can issue a warning. You can ban people from entering Hong Kong, but I don't think you can impose sanctions because of that.
即係澳門嗰個做法咧，佢哋就將呢個聯合國嘅公告。
So that's why the idea of publishing the UN notice, and then there is the immediate taking of effect. So it's difficult because how can you say that you are concerned with Ebola virus? Well, it requires Dr. Going Man or CITB's travel warning system. Mr. Hui, let's use the one with the big font. Mr. Hui, yes, it's an Annex E, the markup copy. As the Deputy Secretary has reviewed, this is based on the 2014 regulation. And Annex E shows the 2015 version vis-à-vis the 2014 version. And we also repeal certain things and to be replaced by some other provisions. On the whole, the scope of sanctions in both versions is the same. So most of the amendments are technical in nature. I'll start with Section 1, commencement. Of course, for the new regulation, there's a new commencement date.
都有佢嗰個有效日期啦嚇，咁咧呢個就係反映係2015。
So it takes effect in April 2015. Interpretation. We've updated the relevant number of the UN resolution. Please continue. Next change comes in Section 6. We use a new template every time we amend the regulation. We would change the reference to the of owned by or otherwise belonging to or held by to a new reference to belonging to or owned or controlled by a relevant person. Similar wording has been used for local legislation as well. Any comment from members? All right, Section 7, another technical amendment. We update the resolution number.
然之後第10條呢，就係有關啲制裁措施嘅。
Section 10, well, some special arrangements. Having gone through the wording of the sanction order in relation to the requirement of assistance, advice, and training, well, it doesn't really apply to humanitarian aid, UN personnel, and so on and so forth. It's only related to Section 9, and that is the supply, sale, transfer, or carriage of certain goods.
So for this round of amendments, we are making these changes so that the new sections are more in line with the UNSC resolution. As for the other sanction regulations, have you also updated them? As for each regulation is based on a different UNSC resolution. The arrangements would be different. So when we look at other pieces of legislation, they may be a bit different. For this Liberia regulation, the assistance or training is technical assistance or training intended solely for support of or used by UMMIL put under here. So for Section 11, it's the same amendment. It's changed. The wording is changed to belonging to or owned or controlled by. And for Section 17, we just changed the wording so that it's clearer. Now it's changed to from that section to Section 4 brackets 2. And then the next section is Part 9, duration. This reflects the expiry date. That is, the following provisions expire at midnight on 8 September 2015. As for explanatory note, the resolution number is changed, the date is changed, and the wording belonging to or owned or controlled by is added instead. So now we are done with the United Nations Sanctions Liberia Regulation 2015. As for the second piece of legislation that we have to look at is United Nations Sanctions Central African Republic Regulation 2015, and the other one is United Nations Sanctions Democratic Republic of the Congo Regulation 2015. Thank you, Madam Chair. I will briefly walk you through the background of these two pieces of regulations. The first one is United Nations Sanctions Central African Republic Regulations 2015. The Central African Republic is in a central part of Africa, and there have been escalating armed conflicts since a number of years ago. So the United Nations have passed resolutions 2127 and 2134 accordingly. And then on 22nd of January 2015, Resolution 2196 was passed, and the duration is extended to 29th of January 2016. After receiving an instruction from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we have published Notice 82, and it is made to give effect to certain decisions in Resolution 2196. This is to extend the previous sanctions. So we did have a similar regulation. So more or less these two regulations are the same. And by the same token, we do not have a lot of trade with the Central Republic. If we look at last year's figure, the total trading capacity was 23 million Hong Kong dollars. So for this sanction, it would not have a significant impact on Hong Kong's trading with Central African Republic. And I would like to ask Mr. Hui to tell you more about this regulation. Before Mr. Hui begins, our legal advisor has some findings, and Timothy would like to ask you about that. Well, this is related to the regulation. When I looked at these two regulations, that is the one on Central African Republic and the one on Republic of the Congo, the wordings of the two regulations are a bit different. It's mainly about Section 2. And for Section 2, bracket 2, here it says that a person must not supply, sell, or transfer, or agree to supply, sell, or transfer directly or indirectly, or do any act likely to promote the supply, sale, or transfer of. And then it uses the wording, a person connected. But for the Congo regulation, for Section 2(a), it says a person must not supply, sell, or transfer, agree to supply, sell, or transfer directly or indirectly, or do any other act likely to promote the supply, sale, and transfer or in prohibited goods to or to the order of a person operating in the territory of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So why is there a difference between the wordings in the two pieces of legislation? Well, I'll ask my DFJ colleague to tell you that. Do you want our legal advisor to give you the number of that section? That's not necessary. So for each piece of subsidiary legislation, we would have to look at the relevant UNSC resolution. For Central Africa regulation, it's about the transfer of arms to the country, and for the Congo regulation is about the people operating in the territory of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So that's why the wordings are different. So the differences in the wording reflect what's written in the Security Council resolution, right? Can you point out to us where this clause is in the resolution? For Central African Republic is the first paragraph, arms embargo, paragraph 1, on page 3 of the resolution. Says that all member states shall continue to take the necessary measures to prevent the direct or indirect supply, sale, or transfer of the CAR from or through their territories or by their nationals, or using their flag vessels or aircraft of arms and related material of all types, including weapons and ammunition, military vehicles and equipment, paramilitary equipment and spare parts for the aforementioned, and technical assistance, etc. So that is supplying arms to Central African Republic. If you look at the Congo one,
就要睇1807號。
We will have to look at resolution 1807, but it's not in members' files. We just have 2198. Now, because for paragraph 1, it is to update the contents of 1807. So if you want to find the wording, it's in resolution 1807. In 2008, it was already written like that. So it started to take effect in 2008, and the same wording has been used all along. I can read it out to you. I just have the English version, so can I read out the English version? Well, let us do this. Can you give it to our colleagues so that photocopies can be made? And then we will scrutinize the Central African Republic regulation first. And then by the time we are done, we will have a copy of the Congo resolution.
好，許生啊，咁我哋開始呢個中非嗰。
So let us start the clause by clause scrutiny of the UN Sanctions Central African Republic Regulation 2015. So this is an updated version of the 2014 regulation, and the differences or amendments are highlighted. So under interpretation, we have added a number of new items, and there are two particular ones. One is AURTF, which means the African Union Regional Task Force referred to in paragraph 1A of Resolution 2196. And the other one is MINUSCA. It means the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in the Central African Republic. Members have asked us to do this. If there are new terms in the regulation which are not familiar to Hong Kong people, we should include such words in the interpretation. So when we formulated this new regulation, we have added these two items, that is MINUSCA and AURTA. What is the regional task force? So does it mean that different places will send people to join this task force? Yes, this is a regional military group, and its members come from member countries of the African Alliance, and this is a peacekeeping call. So the Chinese translation is a bit different from the term that we are more familiar with, so that's why I ask you. So we have added these two groups into interpretation. And also for relevance and entity, we have also added a paragraph. That is, an entity owned or controlled by a person or entity acting on behalf of or at the direction of a person or entity specified by the chief executive as a relevant person or relevant entity in accordance with Section 32. So there's one more level added. On top of entity, there is also another level.
更新咗，咁呢個更新嘅方式咧，喺由舊年年底去到。
And we have observed that similar UN resolutions have used similar wording. Questions, members?
即係而家咧，你寫到係話按佢。
Although you talk about entity acting on behalf of the relevant entity, well, some accountants are worried that the accountants may not know the owner of the property or funds may be engaged in all sorts of activities, and the accountants might be employed for some of the activities. So can you make sure that the provision of normal service will not be implicated and affected?
按指示行事嘅人士，如果佢處理
Where someone is not aware the funds are related to such affected entities, this is a defense.
跟住喺釋義裏邊，我哋亦都加翻呢一個第20。
In the definition, we also add this resolution of 2196. And in the last part of the interpretation, the definition of the commissioner in the context of Hong Kong has been deleted. When we talk about the Commissioner of Customs and Excise, it automatically means it's the Commissioner of Excise and Customs and Excise in Hong Kong. Now let's move to 5.2, Section 5.2. We change the wording from owned or by otherwise held to owned or controlled by. The same for subsection 5 in the same section. Please continue. Section 8. Licenses. The amendment is to update this in line with the 2015 resolution in relation to the UN bodies and African bodies. So it's bracket 2, bracket A.
咁跟住呢，就係第9條第2款去
Section 9, subsection 2, the latter part of subsection 2. Again, this is updated in line with the 2015 resolution. The new license is amended, is incorporated here. There was an earlier question from you, Madam Chair, when we look at the last regulation. That is the target, the license for UN bodies and peacekeeping corps, and that covers assistance, training, or transfer, but it doesn't include training and assistance. But here, assistance and training are covered. So every regulation has to be tailor-made to tie in with the relevant resolution. I want to know more about 9 bracket 2. MINUSCA, AURTF, EU missions or the French forces, are they regular armies?
中非穩定團呢，就係呢個
For MINUSCA MUNISCA is a military organization affiliated to the UN. AURTF is a regional military organization under the African Union. They are regular armed forces. Or there can be mercenaries, just like we used to have Gurkhas. Well, Gurkhas were under the UK military establishment, although they are hired. The soldiers are hired. What I'm saying that if you are not of that particular nationality and you join the military operations there, then it's hired military force. Section 10. Again, changing the wording to owned or controlled. And 10. 2C. We change the relevant resolution number. And the rest is the same as the 2014 regulation, apart from the commencement date. Well, this or the expiry date, it will be up to the 29th of January 2016. To see if the UN will extend this again.
1月29號就屆滿啦。好嘅，大家有冇問題？就呢個中非。
If not, it expires in January 2016. Members, questions? If not, we can move on to Congo.
可以做一啲簡單解釋先。
好啊。
Ms. Yin, maybe you can give a brief introduction first concerning the regulation, United Nations Sanctions, the Democratic Republic of the Congo regulation. Congo is DR Congo is a middle part of Africa. In 2003, 1493 resolution was passed, and sanctions were imposed on DR Congo. Recently, in early 2015, the Security Council passed Resolution 2198 concerning arms embargoes and financial sanctions. Again, this is about an extension. The sanctions would be extended to the 1st of July 2016.
計啦，呢個剛果民主共和國同香港嘅貿易咧，亦
And the trade between Hong Kong and DR Congo is just $300 million. The UN sanctions will not have significant impact on the trade between Hong Kong and DR Congo, because this is mainly about the extension of previous sanctions. The relevant regulation will expire in July 2016 unless the UN extends it further. With regard to the question raised by the legal advisor, let's see if the legal advisor has got further questions. We were given the 2008 resolution, and that is 1807. And the wording is what we find in the regulation. So I would like members to know that if different wording is used in the relevant resolutions, it will be reflected in local regulations. Thank you, legal advisor.
呢兩條制裁規例同埋一陣間南蘇丹嗰度咧，都係好離譜嘅呢啲國。
Yes, these countries are really outrageous. Like Sudan, where they have collective actions, collective brutality against the children, women, and other people.
日本去說
We use the text with the large font to illustrate what changes are made. Interpretation, only some technical amendments. We changed the number of the resolution 219 to 2198. We again can do away with the definition of commissioner. We don't have to specify. That is the Commissioner of Customs and Excise in Hong Kong. All right, we have given a copy of the resolution. I think we can continue. The next change can be found in Section 5. All right. Belonging to or owns or control. Section 6. A technical amendment, the change in the number of the resolution.
然之後去到第8條、第9條。
Section 8, Section 9, again, change of some proper names to reflect the latest name in Chinese and English in the UN resolution. Members may note that in the case of DR Congo regulation, we do not put these names of organizations in the interpretation section. Well, this regulation has a long history. It started in 2003 when the UN imposed sanctions, and we have been updating the regulation time and again. So in the past, we put the full name of the UN organizations and relevant licensed organizations in full in the regulation. We haven't received any comment that they have doubts about the names. So for the 2015 regulation, we stick to the drafting that we have been using, and that is we do not use the abbreviations, we do not provide the names in the interpretation section. But this is just a drafting style. If the industry prefer to do it like the Central African Republic regulation, we can make changes next time. But that depends on what the industry feels about this. Here we don't have the same African Union organizations mentioned here.
即係特運部隊啊，就係 OK。
跟住條文嘅第10條呢，亦都係擁有同埋。
Section 10 again is about using the term belonging to owned or control. And then there are some investigation powers. No change to those. The next amendment is in Section 30. It's a technical amendment to the resolution number. And the regulation would end until the 1st of July 2016. Questions? If not, we can continue. I have to explain to members that this is a special case for the legal services division because they have different legal advisors for different sanction orders, in order that all the legal advisors in the division would have some experience.
南蘇丹嗰個制裁啦，嚇係 CR 75、53、5。
Next, we have a CITB CR 75, 55, 3, bracket stroke 5. The fourth one is this South Sudan regulation. It's in the Middle Eastern part of Africa. In 2013, the president and the former vice president were engaged in a political structure, so the security in South Sudan deteriorated. In March 2015, the UN passed resolution number 2206, imposing a one-year sanctions on South Sudan, including travel ban and financial sanctions. The sanctions would last until the 2nd of March 2016. Trade between Hong Kong and South Sudan is very small. It's $60 million for the whole year. So the sanctions on South Sudan will have insignificant economic impact on our trade because of the small volume of trade. And again, I would like to defer to my colleague, Mr. Hui, on the details of the regulation. According to the paper, the $16 million of trade involves transshipment. This is a new regulation. South Sudan
分裂出嚟嘅國家。
It's a country that was split out from another country, so that's why this is a new regulation. So we do not have a marked up copy, and we will be looking at this new piece of regulation, which is the United Nations Sanctions South Sudan regulation. As for the content, it's mainly about two areas. Well, first is about financial sanction. Second is about travel ban measures. So these are typical sanction measures. So for the template we use is almost exactly the same as other UN sanction regulations. Madam Chair, I'll take members through the clauses one by one. Well, let me ask our legal advisor. Well, this is a standard template. We have been quite interactive in the past years concerning these regulations, so we have stuck to very similar templates. The wordings are more or less the same, but our legal advisor has been very smart. Just now, our legal advisor has found some discrepancies in wording in the two regulations, so that's why he raised the question. So for these regulations, I would like to ask our legal advisor, do you find any differences? No, actually, this regulation is the same as other UN sanction regulations, and it's based on the relevant UNSC resolution. But I suggest that we should do clause-by-clause examination. However, we don't have to be too focused on the wording. Mr. Hui can just tell us what the regulation reflects. Now, the first part of the regulation is interpretation. And for relevant entity and relevant person, we can always see these two terms in sanction regulation. As for the relevant resolution is 2206. It's also put under interpretation. As for license, is also a major part of the regulation. Authorized officer, economic resources, these are also often seen. But we do not have the commissioner for customs and excise here because it's not necessary for this piece of legislation. Okay, then let's move on to Section 2, prohibitions. Section 2, prohibition against making available funds, etc., or dealing with funds, etc. The content reflects what we discussed just now is about the relevant entities' funds. They cannot be handled directly or dealt with directly. And for these relevant entities, they will give instructions to relevant persons. So such relevant persons are also subject to the sanctions. As the legal advisor said, this is a standard way of drafting a sanction regulation. As for Section 3, is prohibition against entry or transit by certain persons. Under subsection 4, it's also about a specified person, and it says that specified person means a person designated by a committee for the purposes of paragraph 9 of Resolution 2206. Part 3, license. The sanction measures are exempted under certain circumstances, and this is the license arrangement. The chief executive can grant licenses, and the requirements are set out under subsection 2. And for subsection 3, if the CE grants such licenses, he would have the duty to notify the relevant UN committee. So this is in line with the license arrangements of the UN. Please continue. Under the same part, we have Section 6. Provision of false information or documents for purpose of obtaining license. If a person does so, he is criminally liable. Section 7. License or permission granted by authorities of places outside Hong Kong SAR. If other countries grant such licenses in accordance with their valid laws, then when the persons conducted the relevant acts, then they would not be subject to the sanctions. Part 5, Section 8. Power of magistrate or judge to grant warrants. So these are the relevant court powers. This is a very standard way of drafting. Part 6. Disclosure of information or documents. When this regulation is enforced, information or documents can be disclosed to certain parties, and under C, you can see who can get such information. Part 7, other offences and miscellaneous matters. So it detailedly states that when these sanction measures are implemented, certain people have to bear the criminal liability. As for the miscellaneous matters, they are about procedures. Part 8, duration. This regulation expires at midnight on the 2nd of March 2016. Okay, any questions from members? And I would like to thank you all for attending the meeting. And I would also like to thank our legal advisor as well as the government representatives. I think our legal advisors have done a good job. But we have to keep on monitoring the executive. This is interactive because we have these subcommittees, so the government has to keep working hard. I think the next meeting will be held in October. I wish you a great summer holiday.